it's very uncomfortable when we're going through these formative years because it's not what we're used to. Geographic determinism argues that geography dictates everything that happens.
Right. Okay.
That's why
so
I'm
it's
not
a portion.
determinist.
It's in your mind. It's a
Yes.
portion. Yes.
It's a major factor, but so also is
History.
Well, no, you see, the history happened on the geography.
This episode is brought to you by EFG Hermes One, your one app for investing in more than 35 stock markets worldwide. Hey everyone, I'm Malak Fuad, and this is what I did next from A&T Media. We're continuing the conversation today with award-winning journalist and best-selling writer Tim Marshall. You said in an interview with The Times in 2023, you said about journalism as a profession and how it's changed. You said, and I'm quoting you, "I come from that school of journalism where you really try to stay in the background, try not to say I in my reports, and you don't get in the way of the story. That's changed. Even at Sky, there was some pressure to put yourself into the story. And that's now a normal thing, and I'm not keen on it." And I find that super interesting because that's always been my approach as well. But today, if you're not putting yourself in the story, you're not going to get the clicks, right? So it's completely changed.
Yeah, there was a sea change, a slow sea change. I can't really date it, but from at least 2010, probably earlier. Both across the media, newspapers, for example, sub-editors or editors would tell people to rewrite if they started a sentence with "I went to," I don't care what you did. And it began to change. And at Sky, there was a bit of, you didn't do a piece to camera, when you appear in that report. And I said, well, I'm only in London. I mean, I would do one, because if they spent all the money to send me to Syria, you have to prove that we're investing in journalism. I'm there. But I say, well, it doesn't matter if I stand outside the MOD at midnight. There's no one in there anyway. But there began to be this pressure, no, put yourself in it, and also personalities. And I understand it. And, there are journalists I stop and actually listen, because it's not really their personality. It's usually what they have to say. But so it's become quite personality driven, and programs centered around this reporter that's gone somewhere, and they often are, pretty good at what they do. But it's not really me. I'm often asked to tell war stories, and I'm uncomfortable doing it because, I fly in. Sorry, I just used the word I. Somebody flies in. You spend a couple of weeks in somewhere interesting, then you go home. Whereas the people doing the fighting, they're either a soldier from abroad that's there for a year, or they live there and they're there for their whole lives. So it just seems a bit cheap to sort of talk about, my little adventure. So it wasn't for me. And so all those things come together, and I just think I probably need to leave. And Sky were great. They were great. They offered me various things, and then when I wanted to go, they cooperated, and they were great. No hard feelings either way.
Yeah, good. You also spoke about, in the same interview, I think, about how while you were working as a correspondent, you started to look at your stories from the point of view of including geographical elements and understanding the geography of why were you in this? Why was there this conflict in the first place? Why is there a conflict in Bosnia? Why is there a conflict in Syria? And you start to think about it from that perspective. And you brought up two really, really great examples, which I'd love you to share, either both or one of them. You talked about Bosnia and how the clearing of villages was important for the direction of that war. And then the other example you gave was in Syria's civil war, when people talk about Assad losing half the country, half the country was desert anyway, so it's not relevant. Because it's a great way to introduce your books, and it's a great way to explain why it's important for us to think of these things.
Well, it's a long, complex answer, so I'll breeze past the Bosnia one, but that was when the germ first came, but it was then began to be magnified when I realized the rationality of violence, and also the strategy of I need to do this because it leads to that, which is based on geography. Now, there's a lot more else going on, which is nationalism, narratives.
It's one part of the story, but it's a story that
Yes.
we'd overlooked for decades, isn't it?
Trump's a great example in that, yes, his force of personality and leadership is driving things. But you have to remember that the reason he's in the position he's in and doing what he's doing, there are many, many other factors, social, intellectual, and geographic. And the fact that we have moved on from the 20th century, we have moved on from the post-Cold War era into a new era. I was trying to come up with the era of hemispheres or the hemispheric era. I'm not sure what it is, but if he'd have tried to do what he's doing now 30 years ago, it wouldn't work. So you need to understand it's not just the personality, it's the factors that help to create him and propel him. And some of those are geographic, for example, where the lithium is, etc.
Yeah.
So why he wants Greenland. So Syria is a great example, yeah. I forget which visit it was, but there was a lot of reporting going on that he'd lost half the country. But if you know the geography of Syria and you know that there's one motorway and that it is the spine of the country connecting Aleppo, Hama, Homs, Damascus, Deraa, and that 85% of the country lives pretty much each side of it, as you would, a bit like in your country.
Like in Egypt, we live along the Nile.
85% people live several miles from the Nile. Why wouldn't you? I mean, where else are you going to live?
Yeah.
So I was reporting he's lost half the sand, which is such a different thing to losing half the country. And I argued at the time, I don't think he's going to lose the whole country. He's just going to be the biggest of the warlords for years. And that was the case until there's now another of the biggest warlords, and he's not in charge of all the country either. So so that geographic lens is extremely useful as one of the major underpinning factors in what happens.
We can think of it as geographical determinism. Could that be the way we think of this?
Sorry.
No.
La habibti.
Why not?
By the way, I've got one Arabic phrase, but it gets me a long way, and it's أنا بتعلم عربي شوي. I'm learning Arabic slowly.
Yes, that will get you into a lot of rooms.
It's pretty much the only phrase I have.
Absolutely, but people are willing to work with you on that. Yeah.
Should claim. No,
how would you describe
the geographic
core
determinism,
thesis? What's the core thesis of your books?
Right. There is such a thing as geographic determinism. There was a very good book written a couple of years ago, Geography is Destiny, but it's a good book, but I don't agree.
Okay.
Geography is.
But can we just explain geographical determinism means, in other words, that geography dictates a lot of a nation's destiny, correct?
No, I think geographic determinism argues that geography dictates everything that happens.
Right. Okay.
That's why
so
I'm not.
So it's a portion. It's in your mind. It's a portion. Yes.
It's a major factor, but so also is
history,
intellectual thought. Well, no, you see, the history happened on the geography. Great example is the British. We had oak trees, lots and lots of oak trees, more than
so you build ships.
Our European friends did. And oak is brilliant for building big ships that cannonballs bounce off. And we have deep water ports because of a jagged coastline. And if we hadn't had the jagged coastline, deep water ports that can take big ships and oak trees, we couldn't have done what we did.
Yeah.
And then we had coal. So the history played out on the geography, but
they're not interlinked, but they're not the same thing.
No, they're not the same thing, but they're absolutely related. I mean, tell me about the Somalian Navy in the 16th century. There wasn't one. They haven't got any trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty broad brush, but you get the idea.
But it makes the point. Yeah.
Yeah. But then, of course, you have to have the intellectual impact of that history on current thinking. You have to have leaders. I mean, there's also the theory of great leaders, that they're what drives it. And that's wrong as well. Mm-hmm. They are a factor. economics, which of course is related to geography, but so many things: economics, history, geography, politics. They all push it.
This episode is brought to you by EFG Hermes One, your one app for investment across more than 35 stock markets worldwide. With EFG Hermes One, you can buy and sell orders in real time for immediate execution across multiple global markets. You can keep track of your favorite stocks by creating and customizing multiple watch lists and make informed investment decisions with their advanced technical analysis tools to study market trends and investor behavior. So supercharge your financial journey and download the EFG Hermes One app on the Apple App Store and on Google Play and start investing today. Your books are runaway successes. I mean, they're accessible, they're informative, they're fun, and you bring to it the eye of someone who's really, embedded in current affairs. Why is it that we haven't been looking at the world in this way in decades? It's not you're not inventing something new here.
No.
You've just highlighted something that's been under our nose for forever.
Well, there are elements in academia and especially in the military and in trade that have always understood this. The term geopolitics really went out of fashion after World War II, and that was because there is a connection between geopolitics and Lebensraum, the German Nazi word, living space.
Yeah.
And because the Nazis stole, borrowed, used some of this way of thinking, which is a very different thing to geopolitics, but because of that, after World War II, the term geopolitics made people a bit uncomfortable and nervous.
It felt dirty.
Yeah, even though it's not. It's just if you believe that geopolitics is a driving factor in what happens, it doesn't mean you're a Nazi and want to have Lebensraum.
Yeah.
That was their version. So it became this dirty word in academia and everywhere else. And so people stopped sort of thinking about all those interconnected. And also, especially after the Cold War, even during it to an extent, the European intellectual elite began to sort of think that, war, we don't do that anymore. And especially, I think, from about 2000, war, very 20th century.
Yeah. Francis
Hard
Fukuyama,
power.
end of history.
No, we don't do that either.
Yeah.
We do collegiate cooperation. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's a good thing. There should be more of it. But therefore, I think they allowed themselves to think that hard power wasn't actually still the ultimate. I wish it wasn't so. But just because I wish it wasn't so doesn't mean I argue that it is so. As what I think people do. They're uncomfortable with what I think are the uncomfortable truths of hard power. Lenin, and I'm hardly a Leninist or a Trotskyite or a Marxist, but it was Lenin who said power comes from the barrel of a gun. And ultimately, it is what is behind power. And even in a liberal democracy, if that power is ultimately challenged, where the hell do you think the backup for it comes from?
Do you think that the place we're at today, where Trump is, just reveling in the raw power that he has at his disposal, do you think it was inevitable that we would come back to this point? That the post-World War II world would unravel? I mean, aren't these things kind of cyclical at the end of the day?
Yes. Oh, God, yeah. Okay, well, again, see, I think that's a paucity, not what you said. I think the paucity of thought, again, mostly by the Americans. By the Europeans. The Americans never thought this. They've always been aware of hard power. I think that there were elements in the European academia, politics, and journalism who, for whatever reason, assumed that sort of 1945 to now, to a few years ago, was normal, as opposed to an aberration.
Yeah,
But
and that it would stay like that.
Yeah, did the Roman Empire last forever? Of course it didn't. Did the British Empire? No. Ottoman, or to be more, I think more applicable is systems. The concert of Europe after the Napoleonic Wars was put into place.
Yes.
Well, it lasted 6-7 decades.
It lasted until World War I, didn't it?
Yeah. but it started to unravel slightly before. So why would this system that we are in and that the Americans essentially set up after World War II, of course it has a sell-by date. I had no idea when that sell-by date was, but when it starts to happen, you can see it. And it's sad because I think it did the world pretty good job of relative stability. And so now we are in the foothills of designing a new system. The Board of Peace, for example, by Trump, it's just an attempt at it. A new system, and it's very uncomfortable when we're going through these formative years because it's not what we're used to. And I don't know how it's going to settle down. I suspect it settles down into another bipolar world, this time China and America, various countries lining up behind them. But the difference with the previous bipolar is that Russia had very little to offer anyone except a 5-year tractor plan, whereas China has a hell of a lot to offer in goods, services, well, not so much services, goods, military, money, as do the Americans. So we now have more of a choice on which side and how much we want to hedge.
But the arrogance so far of the Americans thinking that they can dictate what this new world is going to look like. China so far is staying quite silent. I mean, I think they're waiting to see what's going to happen.
You're right about there's a degree of arrogance, but there's also, and I don't like this, there's a degree of understanding that we're at the beginning of it and they mean to shape it. I mean, the best example was recently, I think it's a brilliant example of Venezuela, where a lot of people said it's all about the oil. No, it's far too narrow a lens.
Yeah.
Yes, it's about the oil, but it is also about creating the new parameters. Because in Venezuela, there is bauxite and many other metals, which the Americans want to have control of the supply chain, as well as oil. But also, Hezbollah operates very nicely in Venezuela and the rest of Latin America. And the Russians and the Chinese are all over it. So what you do with your operation in Venezuela is not only do you try to safeguard the oil for yourselves and the market, but the precious metals, which are as important as oil now, and you simultaneously say to those three elements, get out of town, the Monroe Doctrine's back. And that's not just about Venezuela, that's about Latin America.
It's almost like a blueprint, right? They're sort of, it's almost a made-for-TV drama where it's got every element.
It's going to be a great film in about 3 years' time. Dark 040 or whatever it is.
Exactly.
So this is a thought-out strategy. We might not like the manner in which they're going about it. You don't have to like it or dislike it to understand it. So you're right, perhaps, about the arrogance. But any American president in going forward will be approaching geopolitics and diplomacy from this angle.
Yes.
They might go about it in a very different way and very different temperament, but the starting position will be the same. Sorry, last thing on this. Mark Carney's speech at Davos was really, really interesting because he basically said what I think is true, that when trade begins to be viewed through the lens of national security, then you see people playing much harder. So now, if you think, oh, well, our trade on this, and this, our national security is dependent upon this, you will play much more hardball. And it's unfortunate, but that's where we are.
I think what's happened is we've just accelerated because we have a character like Trump in the White House to a point where we would have been anyway in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years.
But there's a way of doing things, though, isn't there?
No, there is a way of doing things, absolutely. But he says what is never said out loud, doesn't he? And so, and now everyone's rushing to, position themselves either as the anti-Trump or the Trump adjacent or however they see themselves. But he is now the benchmark.
The Chinese are doing something similar, but just in a much more polite Chinese characteristical way. They go into countries, Kazakhstan or whatever, Mongolia, and say, here's the deal. For the same
And they
reasons.
do it through economic development, don't they? And so people are willing to go along. Yeah.
There's quite a lot of bullying goes on, but it's just
there is, and in Africa too.
I think she's brilliant. Xi, he has that sort of quiet menace about him. He doesn't need to shout. Everyone knows he's got a big stick.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me today. I hope this conversation helped put things in perspective about what's going on around us. We'd love to hear your feedback. Please leave us a message on either YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. You can also reach us on all the social media platforms. Next week, I'll be bringing you an exclusive interview with the co-founders of Gourmet Egypt, Jalal Ghazaleh and Dalia Sultan. And for those who are long-term viewers and listeners of the show, you'll remember that they were actually the second guests we ever had in 2021. I hope you can stay tuned for that and listen to the amazing story that led to their incredible IPO.